Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today in this exciting session of the GLF conference titled Biodiversity for Resilience. My name is Rodrigo Barrios, and I'm Strategic Partnerships Manager at the Crop Trust, an international organization based in Bonn, Germany, working to safeguard our world's crop diversity forever. In this hour and a half, we will explore the current global state of our crop diversity, the lessons learned from past years and pending challenges when it comes to its conservation, and also the links that must be strengthened and promoted to ensure this resource is used in the field by farmers and producers. Our agrobiodiversity holds an enormous potential to tackle some of the most pressing challenges our agricultural and food systems are facing in the current context of growing population and changing climate. The experts joining us today will give a comprehensive outlook on this fundamental issue for food security and sustainable development and help pave a way forward now that our biodiversity targets are being reassessed. We encourage you all to check our first Slido question by using the QR code shown in the screen. We also encourage you to check the Whova app and the event website for more background on our speakers. Given we will have limited time and we will not be giving long introductions and jump directly to the issues. Now, to kick off this session, let me introduce you a quick video which will help start the session with an inspiring tone before moving ahead with our first panel, moderated by my colleague Charlotte Lusty, Head of Programs at the Crop Trust, which will gather leading gene bank managers globally to discuss what the global system for crop diversity conservation entails. On to the video, please, and thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Now, please let me introduce you to our first panel titled Building a Global Rational System for Crop Diversity Conservation. The panel will be moderated by my colleague Charlotte Lusty, Head of Programs at the Crop Trust, and will feature three leading gene bank managers from across the globe. The first is Testerio Nyamongo, who works in the Kenyan National Gene Bank. We have Laverne Gueco, who works in the University of Philippines, Los Baños, also in the Philippines National Gene Bank. And finally, Vania Acevedo, with extensive experience in Embrapa and in Brazilian National Gene Bank, and now leading the Gene Bank in Ikrisat in Hyderabad. Welcome all.
Thanks, Rodrigo. It's great to be part of this panel and to be with my colleagues here. As you saw in the video, there is a community of us working on agricultural biodiversity, and there's many aspects to the community that we work in. There are very tight community that is all bound under one international treaty, the International Treaty for Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. We also have many other aspects that bind us together, including a commission based at the FAO. We have gene bank standards that are published. We have a global plan of action that binds our community together using similar, the same targets and activities. And all of this, I think, adds a lot of strength to what we do and helps us reach some important objectives. And with us in the panel today, we have 3 gene bank managers who are from very different parts of the world. They work on different crops, and they have very different scopes to their gene banks. And I think it's a good opportunity for us to understand a little bit more about the community and the things that bind us. And so I would like to pose a few questions to the panel members. And I'm going to pose my first one to our Kenyan friend, Desiderio Nyamongo. Greetings there. Habari gani, Desiderio. So, Desiderio, tell us, I mentioned a few things about our community and the things that we all share in common. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about this system and what would life be like if we didn't have these things that keep us working together?
Thank you, Charlotte. If there's anything that's good that has happened in the recent years, is having the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources in place. I know it was triggered by the negotiations then that were going on under the CBD, where Nagoya was being negotiated. And men and women then decided that food security is so important thing that we can't allow it to start political debate of how best we can share our resources. And that's how the International Treaty was born. Now the International Treaty has enabled us to expand, enables access of genetic resources, accessing the diversity. Remember, it has some mechanisms under it, like material transfer agreements, where countries easily exchange materials, and the materials are then available to breeders for use to address agricultural challenges that indeed productivity. So having a regime like the International Treaty is it addresses the issues of food and hunger. Now, secondly, the video that we have just seen, see if the problem being mentioned there, you are not able to get to the areas where you can get resistant genes to then develop the varieties that are required. That will indeed develop agricultural development completely. Now, having the GPA, it has assisted identify the global gaps in terms of biodiversity conservation and set the conservation and the use agenda so that parties are informed on what is constraining their conservation and how it should be utilized. Secondly, it's an instrument that you can use to mobilize resources for utilization in the conservation work. That genetic resources go across boundaries. In other words, you cannot just leave them. They don't respect the national borders. And that's why having such a global community with such an instrument makes it very useful to secure our global biodiversity.
No, that's very helpful, Desiderio. You're coming from a national collection with a national focus, but you're saying this international treaty allows countries around the world to share important resources that will help us develop agriculture and address food security. And that's a very important aspect of the treaty and also the activities of the global plan of action that brings us all together. And maybe Vania Azevedo from India, based in Hyderabad, working on an international collection. Vania, maybe you can also make some complimentary comments on what Desiderio is saying. What do you think life would be like without this treaty and without the facilitation of sharing materials across borders?
Charlotte, if we didn't have the treaty, then the mechanism, the only mechanism now currently available is the Nagoya Protocol. And imagine going through the rigors of negotiations under the Nagoya Protocol so as you access the genetic resources, especially in the event of a pandemic or an urgent challenge that you require genetic resources to address that particular challenge.
Right. So
having a lot of,
yeah, a lot more work. Yeah. Vanya, what have you got to add to this?
Yeah, so clearly after the CBD, the countries started to become a bit more protective and sharing their materials, right? Especially the native ones. And as the CEO said, the crops do not respect borders, and we all are completely dependent on exotic material. So all the countries depend on other countries to maintain their agriculture. So I always remember Vaus, my colleague from Embrapa, in all his presentations about genetic resources, he always asks, what did you have for lunch today? So in Brazil, the typical lunch would be rice, beans, tomatoes, lettuce, meat, maybe cassava, the only native one. So Brazil is completely dependent on exotic material. But of course, Brazil also has lots of genetic resources that is native from there. Lots of tropical fruits, cassava, and some things that they became more and more protective, like all the countries. And the treaty came to support the exchange of material to be there. And also to help us and as international gene banks to be able to keep distributing and answering to the demands from the entire world for the specific crops that we are keeping. So agreements like this allow us to keep doing our work and allow the countries to keep receiving the material that they depend on to develop their agriculture, because the demands are always changing, the climate is changing, the diseases are appearing from all the sides. So we need diversity to keep developing agriculture. So the treaty is very important to allow this to continue.
Thanks, Vanya. So we've painted a picture of this unique situation where different parties are able to share resources across borders. We are comfortable in the knowledge that it isn't going to take a long time to do this, a lot of paperwork. We don't have to worry about urgency. We should be able to move varieties of banana and maize and the crops that are important to sorghum and the millets. So we've got that policy framework. We've got the trust that helps us move stuff across borders. Maybe I could move on to Laverne, who's based in the Philippines. And Laverne, we have different types of gene banks in our system. And you are working in a national program there in Los Baños. Can you describe a little bit what is the scope of your gene bank there, and how do you see the system with the layering of different gene banks, from the international ones, the national ones, perhaps there are community ones. Can you describe a little bit how it works from your perspective?
Yeah, I think let me try to differentiate also national from international gene banks. So I think mostly international gene banks focuses more on specific crops across different countries, while national gene banks work on a wide range of crops, obviously with more focus on the countries of origin. But I think collaborations between these two gene banks is very important. So ideally, national gene banks should duplicate collections in international gene banks, so that in an event that something goes wrong with a collection, they always have backups, and they can always repatriate lost germplasm collections. So I think it's important to have a strong collaboration between the two. So yes.
So you really rely on another place, an international collection. If you were to lose something from your collection, you'd be able to get it back because it's duplicated. Are there other things that you would like to see happening? Do you think international gene banks could do more of something, or national gene banks could do more of something else? What do you see as the division of roles here?
I think international gene bank settings is well in place, obviously because most international gene banks have the resources and the facilities to do the conservation and evaluation work. So for national gene bank, it varies from one country to another. So there are countries which have very huge or big programs on genetic resources conservation, while there are some countries with minimal conservations. I think for major crops also in general, they are well studied also. But I think what probably national gene banks could also focus on is more on indigenous and native species of plants, because normally these underutilized species are underutilized, and they need to be collected, conserved, and evaluated, because some of these native species have some great potentials. And probably if we could somehow evaluate and see some good materials, we can somehow promote their use and somehow helping also in conserving these materials.
That does sound very important. Laverne, tell me something about what you might find in the Philippines. I always see in the market stalls there piles and piles of the most fantastic looking greens and different types of beans. What would you say in your mind is something we should all be eating, but you can only find it in the Philippines?
Well, we do have a lot of interesting fruits, exotic fruits that are shared, not just found in the Philippines, but maybe shared within some of our Asian countries, like, for example, mangosteen, durian, and among others. But if you are looking for some species which are endemic to the Philippines, I think the pili nut is very excellent. It has excellent eating quality. It has other uses, like the oil is excellent, and it's somehow also tolerant to strong typhoons, which is frequent in the Philippines. So and very adapted and probably resistant to most pests and diseases available. So it's something interesting.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that with us. Vanya, maybe I could get your perspective quickly from the international side. Do you see Laverne's point about international collections being an important safety duplicate for the national collections and focusing on a different type of crop? Just quickly give us your opinion. We've got quite a few questions, so I'll move on to them afterwards.
Yeah, I think he's totally right. It's clear that we work as a copy of the collections. Lot of the materials were collected like 30 years ago, 20 years ago. And repatriation is something that happens quite a lot. Yes. So many countries, when they are able to reestablish or to improve their infrastructures, they come back to us and they ask us to repatriate the material that was collected there. So ICRISAT already repatriated a few thousands of accessions to at least 15 countries. So they rely on us, that they believe that we will keep this material alive, well conserved, safety duplicated. So yeah, I agree that this is also one of the jobs that we have in international gene banks. And the diversification of crops is something that now that we have more focusing more in nutrition and other kinds of necessities of human food. I think it's something important that we should be discussing. And adding not all, it's totally impossible to replicate what all the national gene banks are doing. But I believe that the international gene banks can increase a little bit more the scope based on the other crops that have high demands as well. Yes.
Right. So, I mean, let's touch a bit more upon access to these resources. And Laverne, actually, there's a question for you. Is there a way for Filipino locals to contribute and withdraw from the gene bank? So how do people get in touch with you, or either to put something in or to ask you for resources?
So normally we do have some collecting missions. So normally we have partners in a particular area, and we usually ask them to give us some of the interesting genetic resources. Although normally we have target species being collected, but yeah, normally we do collecting missions. There are also some other people or researchers who are giving or donating to our gene bank, so we can for storage. So we also accept donations from private and from other government institutions, and people access, or researchers access our genetic resources by just filling up a form, distribution form. And most of our clients are plant breeders, because most of our genetic resources are being used by our breeders in our institute for crop improvement work. And we do know the importance of having a broad-based genetic materials in crop improvement.
And is it something they can look at online? How might someone get hold of the form in order to send in a request? Do people have easy?
At the moment, we still have. They have to go personally to us or send us email, but we actually have a database already. We're just hopefully we can upload the database within the next few months, so that this database may be available to the general public, so that they can access our database. We call it Pilgris. So it includes our genetic resources.
Right, and you obviously have a good relationship with breeders. They know how to get to ask for what they need.
Yes, that's
and I don't know if we still have Disterio on the line. He's got a mute button. So if Disterio is still there, it'll be great to ask him. Here he is. But you'll have to unmute Disterio. How do farmers in Kenya, or breeders, researchers, how do they get hold of materials from your gene bank? And do you think it's important to increase the availability of resources that you have available? Sorry, just to add another little question, how do you address issues like benefit sharing?
Thanks for that question. Now, one of the ways that scientists and the farmers access our materials is that we normally have field demos where we involved the other stakeholders, who include the farmers and the researchers. So when we have those demonstration or field days, they get to know our materials, and we get farmers making requests. We have recently joined the global community in having our database in Genesis, and I hope that is going to improve access of the materials, because then the global community will get to know what's available at our national gene bank. Otherwise, just like my previous speaker said, people write us emails, make formal requests, and then we respond to those requests. But because we have yet to upload all what we have into the website, not many people get to know what is available. We have had cases where even our own scientists going out to make collections of materials we actually already have at the gene bank. So that's a gap that needs to be filled. Now, issues of benefit sharing. Materials that are listed under Annex 1 are exempted from the rigors of the Nagoya Protocol, and they are available following the standard material transfer agreement requirements. But materials that are not in Annex 1, sharing within the country, there is no matter of a but getting those materials outside the country, then there's a little bit of problem. That's why I think the negotiations we were having during the last GLB meeting in Rome, we needed to enhance the material, the MLS system, so that we are able to expand the Annex 1 to cover much more material, so that those materials are then available globally. Having not succeeded doing that during the last GB, I think is regrettable.
Yeah, so benefit sharing is a very big issue that we are trying to get right. And benefit sharing comes in many forms, whether it's in the form of the actual material that is shared or the data associated with it. But also the treaty allows us to have a mechanism whereby if anyone's making business or profit out of adaptations of this material, they are obliged to share some of their profit. So the treaty allows us to have that mechanism in place, but obviously still a lot more work to get that working. Now, just going on to some of the questions that are coming up. One of the questions is about the materials that have been grown in the past, so historical materials. Vania, how old is your collection? Do you have in ICRISAT things that are very old that perhaps aren't found anymore in farmers' fields?
Older than me. Some of the materials here were collected in 73, so 1973. So we have very, very old materials. All of them characterized. Some of them we are not using all the time, or people are not asking. So it's an interesting question, because most probably with the climate change and adaptation, this material may perform a bit different now. So it's something interesting. But we have 128,000 accessions, so it's not very easy to conduct all this recharacterization again. But yes, we have very, very old material here.
Yeah, that's a lot of material. So that means a lot of diversity and a lot of different things having grown from the past. Laverne, do you have some old varieties in your gene bank, things that you can't find anymore in fields?
Yes, actually our national gene bank was established in 1976. So it's a bit younger than what ICRISAT have. So we do have some old collections, and unfortunately in the Philippines also, there are already some of these traditional varieties are being displaced already, like the occurrence of genetically modified crops and improved varieties. Somehow some of the farmers have maybe a lot of the materials that we have in the gene banks are no longer available in the field. However, because our gene bank is quite old and it's a national gene bank and we don't get a lot of fundings, there are some cases that we are already experiencing some problems in the germination of some of them. So there is a need to regenerate some of our collections and somehow to ensure that they're viable for a longer period of time.
Right, so that's an important point that ex situ brings, the possibility to conserve things that people are no longer able or interested to grow. And I guess that gives some connection to in situ conservation. Laverne, I don't know if you have connections with people who are conserving in communities or in situ. Is there a connection between ex situ and in situ in the Philippines?
Well, mostly we work on ex situ, but we encourage in situ conservation, especially for farmers' varieties, also especially for endemic fruit species where they are perennial. So actually, whenever we do collecting missions, we always encourage people to conserve these materials. And sometimes when you take pictures of the plants and you tell them these are very important, so somehow the farmers find value on keeping these materials instead of just sometimes farmers are tempted to cut those trees because sometimes they don't find much value on them, or sometimes they use it for other purposes. But when they see us giving value to those species, and the possibility that some other important things may come out from those materials, somehow we also encourage in situ conservation.
Thanks, Laverne. That's good to hear. Desterio, another point for you. How can we mobilize more resources for national gene banks? How do you have any experience of this, or how to fundraise, how to attract more funding coming in to support what you do? Difficult question.
Yeah, what we have been doing is to get our exchequer, the National Treasury, support the conservation initiatives. And we managed to do that by getting the issue of genetic resources and farmers' rights in the Kenya Constitution. We recently had an amendment to the Seed and the Plant Varieties Act again, which covered issues of conservation, genetic resources conservation, and farmers' rights. That way, we are getting closer to the policies and the people who govern how national resources are distributed. I think the parties have the responsibility to ensure that they undertake the conservation work, and with the challenges of climate change, that's becoming more and more clear to the policymakers. The other way of resource mobilizing is to work with the global community. We have worked with the Crop Trust, for example, as you are aware, and they have assisted us mobilize resources to support some of the work that is going on at the National Gene Bank. We also respond. Sorry.
No, I think we're running out of time, Desterio, but you make some really important points about how we have to appeal to governments to see how important this work is and how it supports really vital needs to address climate change. I mean, after all, we all have to eat, and it has to come from all of the hardworking farmers who need every support and access to diversity that they need to ensure that they build stronger systems. Maybe as we pull out of our session, I just add that it's been a real pleasure talking to you all, and I know it's very late for you, Laverne, in the Philippines, so many thanks for you for joining. And Desterio, it's great to see you. I'm sorry we don't get the chance to meet in person. And Vania, I know you've been in a lot of different meetings, and here you are joining us now. So I just want to give a very grateful appreciation for joining you. And I think at this point we can move back to Rodrigo. Thanks.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Mabuhay! My name is Nelisa Hamara. I am an agriculture economist and the coordinator of the GeneBank Impacts Fellowship Program with support from the CGIAR GeneBank platform and the Crop Trust. I co-run this program with Melinda Smale, Professor of International Development at Michigan State University. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to present here today and thank the Global Landscape Forum for providing this platform. With the onset of COVID-19, solutions to combat climate change, biodiversity loss, and food insecurity are ever more urgent. And although it may seem unlikely to some, the world's gene banks and their impacts have a big part to play in contributing to such solutions. First of all, I'd like to talk about the program and why we think it is important. Our GeneBank Impact Fellows help document the contributions of gene banks and the germplasm they conserve and distribute. They get to work on research projects, join workshops, are mentored by economists and conservation scientists. But what are impacts? Impacts are positive and negative, primary and secondary, directly or indirectly, intended or unintended, long-term effects produced by a development intervention. And what is impact assessment? They are studies that estimate the causal effects of research outputs and related activities on one or more development parameters of interest. The goal of the GeneBank Impacts program is to show the causal effects from the gene bank, our intervention of interest, to development outcomes. Such outcomes could be improvements in yield, productivity, household income, or food security. To be able to establish this link, you could trace the pathway from the gene bank to the breeders and scientists in research programs to the development of new and improved varieties and release international seed systems, and eventually to the adoption of farmers. We show how farm productivity is improved, how farmers benefit from high yields, and consumers benefit from lower food prices and enhanced food security. Everyone's happy, right? Unfortunately, as in everything, it's not as easy as it seems. The flow of germplasm from the gene banks to breeders to farmers could take many years, and the effects to household welfare need additional time to materialize. It is a long-term process, and along the way, we need to isolate the factors that could affect this relationship both spatially and temporally. We can establish this causality by showing one or two anecdotes or success stories from a few individuals. This is where the GeneBank Impacts program enters the picture. There has to be a body of literature that documents such links and establishes the causality and GeneBank attribution using data from farm surveys complemented by data from the breeders and the GeneBank's information systems evaluated using econometric techniques and other scientific methods. Sounds complicated, right? It is, but it is necessary. So now, when we talk about GeneBank impacts, we can refer with confidence, for example, the contribution of Erie's International Rice Gene Bank to varietal improvement and crop productivity in Eastern India, where we use a survey data set collected from about 9,000 farmers. Another study looked at the contribution of the SIA Gene Bank to the development of iron biofortified bean varieties and well-being of farm households in Rwanda using data set of about 1,400 farmers. The studies by our GeneBank Impact Fellows map out the variables and actors that could affect this causal relationship, so we could properly attribute the contribution of the gene bank. These results and the work of the fellows is an important stepping stone in understanding how we can meaningfully contribute to the change the world needs. I'd like to close by acknowledging the work from our GeneBank Impacts community of practice. Thank you for being part of the solution, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Melissa, for this great presentation. Before moving ahead with the program, I would first like to reflect on the first question that we pitched before the start of the panel. We asked the audience what one or two words come to mind when hearing the concept gene banks and their importance for sustainable development. And it's very interesting to see a very wide range of questions, from advancement and competitiveness to food security, diversity, and just security at large. It's true that gene banks hold some of our most important resources when it comes to ensuring food security and sustainable development forever. So their benefits are also far-ranging and include many of these important words. So I would like to move ahead with a second video that highlights the role that farmers and users play in this important topic. Thank you.
Dry, hot weather is shriveling crops in the heart of America's farm belt.
Have fueled massive forest fires in the Siberian Arctic.
Biodiversity is reportedly declining faster than that of any time in human history.